Hello everyone, Phil here again doing another motherboard review, another super socket motherboard. This one is from the company DFI, it's the K6XV 3+/66 and it's the revision B2. Now DFI is a company that's not around anymore as far as I can tell. Okay, so let's begin. Well, it is a Super Socket 7 motherboard. It's got the socket here, supports all the major processors from Intel, AMD, Cyrix and IBM, including all the mobile chips like the K6 Plus and the K6 3+. In terms of chipset, we've got the VIA MVP3. So let's just have a look at the chipset. That's the North bridge right here, and the South bridge is down here. So it's another motherboard with the MVP3 chipset. Okay, now with the jumper support, there are very few jumpers. It's got some dip switches over here and over there. There's one jumper here, there's another one there, and there's one here. This one clears the BIOS. This jumper is quite interesting. It basically tells the memory what clock it should synchronize with. Setting it like the way it's set right now, it runs at the same speed as the processor fronted bus. So if you're running a processor at 100 MHz fronted bus, the memory will run at 100 MHz. But if you move the jumper, then it will synchronize with the AGP bus, meaning even if you're having 100 MHz fronted bus, the memory will run at 66. This jumper here, in combination with the dip switches, sets the voltage. Now, we haven't got any silk screen information about the jumpers on this motherboard, so I'm just gonna go by documentation. I couldn't even find a proper user manual. I just found a quick sheet. So if you do happen to have a full manual, just send me a link or something so I can put it on my website. So in terms of voltage support, we can go from 2.1 all the way up to 3.5 volts, and this jumper over here is responsible for setting the fronted bus and the multiplier settings, and we have a choice here of 66, 75, 83, 95 and 100 MHz on the fronted bus, and the usual multipliers from 1.5x all the way up to 6.0x. The BIOS chip is here. It's socketed again, so you can use this motherboard for some hot flashing. The latest BIOS version I found is version 0412, and that's the one I've got on this motherboard. Okay, in terms of memory, there are 3 SDRAM slots. The specifications say that the motherboard takes 384 megabytes. I've never tried that much, because if you're needing that much memory, then really just go with next model up, like a Pentium 2 or Pentium 3. In terms of slots, we have an AGP slot, 4 PCI and 3 ISA slots. Let me just make sure I don't forget anything. Here we've got the controller option. Now the /66 points to 2 UDMA 66 enabled controllers and also a floppy interface. Now let me just see what else is there. I believe that's all. No, we've got some other things to talk about. Fan headers. There is a one CPU fan header here, and there's another one over there. And one other interesting thing is this header port there. That's for a infrared module, and at the front we've got the usual front headers for speaker, power switches and so on. All in all, I must say it's a really neat board. It looks very clean, the layout is fantastic, so this is a really good board if you want to do some good cable management and have a really neat setup. Okay, so let's have a look at the back. Here we find the usual 2 PS2 ports, 2 USB ports, 2 serial and a parallel printer board. And I believe I've covered everything. No, I forgot one thing. Glad I made a list. Onboard cache. This motherboard seems to come in 2 configurations. You can see that there's an empty socket here. That's for another one of these. And the motherboard I have has 1 megabyte of level 2 cache. So there seems to be a version around with 2 MB of level 2 cache, which is pretty nice. So some people are looking for that. They want to max out SuperSocket 7 system and get the most out of such a system, and having more cache means more performance, but also more cacheable memory. And I believe that's it. So we're gonna move on and do some benchmarking and see how this board stacks up against the competition.
Okay, so let's have a look at the hardware and software I'm using to benchmark these motherboards. For Socket 7 hardware, I'm using a Pentium MMX 233 with 64 MB of PC100 SD RAM, a PCI S3 Trio 64V Plus graphics card, and also a PCI 3DFX Voodoo 2 graphics card with 12 MB of RAM. For the SuperSocket 7 comparisons, I'm using a little bit more substantial hardware. We've got a K6XV Plus with 550 MHz, 128 MB of PC 133 SD RAM, and a AGB 3DFX Voodoo 3 3500. In terms of benchmarking, we have a wide range of DOS and Windows benchmarks. Superscape, we've got the PC Player benchmark, Doom shareware, Quake shareware. On the processing side, we're running SuperPi, but also Quake 2 in software mode. And just to check some gaming performance, we're using Unreal in Glide mode and Forsaken in DirectX mode, running at a fairly low resolution of 512 by 384, and therefore just finding if there are any weaknesses in the system. Okay, so let's have a look at some benchmarks. As always, we start with the RDE performance. Enabling DMA mode was not a problem, just ticking the box, do a restart and off you go. However, I expected a little bit more. Reading the instructions and hearing about UDMA 66 mode, I expected a lot more. And what do we get? We just get around 20 megabytes per second. So it's not too bad. It's definitely better than not being able to enable DMA. But in comparison to the other boards, it's one of the slower ones. Oh dear, lots of red for the Socket 7 results. It's not a good sign. It means this is one of the slowest boards. Quite surprised, to be honest. Now, I have used this board in some benchmarks before and never really noticed anything out of the ordinary, but the DOS performance is in particular is quite weak, and the trend continues in Windows, just lagging behind the competition somewhat. So looking at the SuperSocket 7 results, we can see the trend continues, especially in DOS. It is the slowest board across the board, tying with the A Open in the Superscape benchmark, but otherwise it's the slowest board. It redeems itself a little bit in the Windows performance, beating the Gigabyte board, which uses the ALI chipset, but loses against the A Open, which has the exact same chipset, the VIA MVP3. So yeah, there you have it. One of the slowest board I've benchmarked. So what do I think about the board? Really good layout, very clean. It's got a nice color look going. You won't have any troubles doing a neat system build-up with some cable management. DMA mode works, but the performance is somewhat behind the competition. That goes for the RDE performance, for DOS performance, and also for Windows performance. So it's just something to be aware of. And as always, I used the same approach to the BIOS. I'll load the BIOS defaults. I then choose the lowest memory timings. It's not a problem with modern fast memory, and also disable the video ROM. And yeah, that's it. So I'll try to keep it fair and square for everyone. But yeah, this board, one of the slowest ones I've benchmarked so far.